Everything I taught about Islam, I no longer believe it, and even as I say those words now, my chest tightens because I know what they mean. I know what they cost, and I know what people like me are supposed to do with thoughts like this. We bury them, we repent from them. We never speak them out loud, but I cannot stay silent anymore, not after everything that happened to me, not after what I saw, not after the night that changed my life forever. My name is Ahmad Suleiman. I am 42 years old, and for most of my life, I was not just a Muslim. I was a leader, a teacher, a man people came to for answers, a man trained from childhood to defend Islam with my words, my knowledge, and my life if necessary. I was born into it, raised in it, shaped by it. My father was an imam, his father before him. And in our home, faith was not something you questioned. It was something you inherited, like your name, like your bloodline, like your future. I remember being a child sitting on the cold floor of the mosque, repeating verses of the Quran until my tongue moved without thinking, until the words felt less like something I was learning and more like something I was becoming. And by the time I was 14, I had memorized the entire Quran. People praised me. Elders would place their hands on my head and say I would become a great servant of Allah. And I believed them. I wanted that. I wanted to be righteous. I wanted to be certain. I wanted to belong to something that felt unshakable. As I grew older, I studied under scholars who taught me not just what to believe, but how to defend it, how to respond to Christians, how to dismantle their arguments, how to silence doubt before it could grow into something dangerous, and I became good at it, very good. I knew the verses, the hadiths, the arguments. I knew how to speak with confidence even when someone else was emotional, and by the time I was 30, I was leading prayers, delivering khutbahs every Friday, teaching young men who looked at me the same way I once looked at my teachers, with admiration, with trust, with the belief that I knew something they didn't. But what they never saw, what no one ever saw, was what was happening inside me, because beneath all that knowledge, beneath the respect, beneath the position, there was something missing, something I could never explain, something I didn't even have language for at first. It felt like emptiness, but not the kind you notice immediately. It was quieter than that, like a slow absence, like standing in a room where something important used to be, but you can't remember what it was. I prayed 5 times a day, but I never felt known. I fasted during Ramadan, but I never felt close. I spoke about Allah constantly, but I never felt like He spoke back. And I told myself this was normal, this was discipline, this was what faith looked like, obedience without feeling, submission without question. Still, there were nights when I couldn't ignore it. Nights when everything was quiet and I was alone with my thoughts. Nights when the silence felt heavier than usual, and I would sit in the dark and whisper prayers that didn't sound like the ones I recited in public. Softer prayers, more honest prayers. Allah, why do I feel nothing? And every time the answer was the same. Silence. Complete silence. And I hated that silence, but I feared questioning it even more. Because in my world, doubt is not something you explore. It is something you fight, something you crush before it destroys you. So I became very skilled at pretending I was certain, pretending I was at peace, pretending that the questions in my mind didn't exist. And the more I pretended, the more people trusted me, the more they believed I had answers, the more they came to me with their struggles, their fears, their questions, and I would give them confident responses, while secretly wondering why I could guide others, but not myself. I knew the cost of stepping outside what I had been taught. I had seen what happened to people who questioned too much. They were labeled, isolated, sometimes completely cut off from their families, and in some cases worse. So I stayed where it was safe. I stayed where everything made sense on the surface. I stayed where my identity was secure. But safety came at a price, and that price was honesty, because deep down, I knew there were things I did not understand, things I could not reconcile, things I pushed aside, because facing them would mean risking everything I had built my life on. If you are listening to me right now, and you have ever felt that quiet tension inside you, that fear of asking certain questions, that pressure to stay silent even when something doesn't feel right, then you understand more than you think. And maybe that is why I am speaking now, because there are people like me, people who look strong on the outside but are struggling in silence, people who are afraid that if they pull on one thread, everything will unravel. And I was one of those people, holding everything together as tightly as I could, refusing to let anything slip until something happened that I couldn't control, something that broke through all the defenses I had built, something that forced me to confront the very questions I had spent my entire life avoiding. And when that moment came, when that one event shattered the illusion I was living in, I realized something that terrified me more than anything I had ever known. The truth I was defending might not be the truth at all. It started with a girl, and if I am honest, I did not recognize the moment as important when it first happened, because in my position, I had seen many situations like it, many young people struggling, many families coming to me for guidance. And I always believed I knew exactly what to say, exactly how to handle things, exactly how to preserve order, honor, and obedience. But this time, something was different, even if I could not explain it at first. Her name was Zainab. She was 19 years old, quiet, respectful, the kind of girl every parent in our community would point to as an example. She attended my teachings regularly, always sitting near the front, always listening carefully, writing notes, asking questions that were thoughtful but never challenging. And I remember thinking she had a sincere heart, the kind of sincerity we encourage, the kind that follows without resistance, the kind that stays within boundaries. But I would later learn that sincerity can sometimes lead people somewhere unexpected, somewhere dangerous. One afternoon, her father came to see me, and I could tell immediately from the way he entered the room that something was wrong. His face was tight, controlled, the kind of expression a man wears when he is holding back anger because he believes it is justified. And after greeting me, he did not waste time with small talk. He went straight to the issue. "My daughter has been speaking to a Christian boy," he said, his voice low but heavy with frustration, and I felt that familiar tightening in my chest. Not fear, not yet, but a sense of responsibility, because situations like this required firmness, clarity, authority. I asked him if it was serious, hoping perhaps it was something small that could be corrected quickly, but he shook his head and said, "She refuses to stop." And in that moment, I already knew what had to be done, at least according to everything I had been taught. Imam, because in our community, this was not just a personal choice. It was a matter of honor, of identity, of spiritual danger, and I agreed to speak with her. When Zainab entered the room, she looked nervous, but not broken. There was a quiet strength in the way she stood, and I remember noticing that immediately, though I ignored it, because my role was not to observe her emotions, it was to correct her behavior. So I spoke firmly, asking her to explain what I had heard, giving her the opportunity to deny it, to step back, to choose the safer path. But she did not deny it. She hesitated only for a moment, before saying softly, "It is true," and something about the way she said it unsettled me. Not defiant, not ashamed, just honest. I reminded her of the seriousness of her actions, of the boundaries she was crossing, out of the consequences not just socially but spiritually. I told her this path would lead her away from truth, away from Allah, and she listened. But then she said something that caught me off guard, something I was not prepared for. "He talks about God like he knows him," she said. And I felt irritation rise in me, because I had heard this kind of language before. Emotional, subjective, lacking discipline. So I responded quickly, telling her that we know Allah through obedience, through submission, not through feelings. But she shook her head slightly, and her next words, they stayed with me in a way I could not shake. "No, it's different. He says God loves him, personally." And I dismissed it outwardly. But inwardly something shifted, a discomfort I could not explain. Because love in the way she described it was not something we spoke about often, not in that personal, intimate sense. I told her she needed to end the relationship immediately, that this was not negotiable, that this was for her own good, and she did not argue. She did not raise her voice. Instead, she asked me a question, a simple question that felt far more dangerous than anything else she had said. "Have you ever felt that, Ustad?" And for a moment, I did not understand what she meant, so I asked her to clarify, and she said, "Felt like God knows you, not just your actions." And I froze, because no one had ever asked me that before. Not like that, not so directly, and I gave the answer I had been trained to give, the correct answer, the safe answer. Allah is all-knowing, but even as I said it, I knew it was not what she was asking. And she knew it too, because she looked at me in a way that made me feel exposed, as if she could see the gap between my words and my experience. And when she said softly, "That's not what I mean," I felt something rise in me, not just frustration, but something deeper, something defensive. So I ended the conversation abruptly, telling her enough had been said, and her father took her away. That should have been the end of it. Another case handled, another situation resolved. But it did not end there, because a week later I heard what had happened. I heard that her father had beaten her, not severely by some standards, but enough to leave marks, enough to send a message, enough to bring her back into line. And when I heard it, I told myself what I had always told others, that this was discipline, that this was protection, that this was necessary to preserve order and faith. But something inside me resisted that explanation. Something inside me refused to accept it as fully right, and that night when I lay down to sleep, I could not rest, because her question would not leave me. It kept echoing in my mind, over and over again. "Have you ever felt that?" And I tried to pray. I went through the motions, reciting the words I had known all my life, but they felt empty, mechanical, like I was repeating something that no longer carried weight. And for the first time in my life, a thought entered my mind that I could not immediately silence, a thought that felt dangerous, forbidden, almost like crossing a line I had sworn never to approach. What if she was right? What if there was something about God that I did not understand? Something beyond rules and obedience, something I had never experienced, and I tried to push the thought away. I reminded myself of everything I knew, everything I had studied, everything I had taught. But it did not work, because once a question like that takes root, it does not leave easily. It grows, quietly, persistently, and as I lay there in the darkness, staring into nothing, I realized that, for the first time, I was not certain, not completely, not in the way I had always been, and that uncertainty frightened me more than anything else ever had. Because if I allowed myself to follow it, if I allowed myself to explore it, it could unravel everything, my identity, my purpose, my place in the world. And yet, despite that fear, despite everything at stake, the question remained, stronger than my attempts to silence it, pressing against my mind until finally, in a moment of quiet, I didn't plan. I thought something I had never allowed myself to think before. What if I have been wrong? My whole life. And the moment that thought formed, I felt something shift deep inside me, like a crack forming in something that had always felt solid. And I knew, even then, even in that moment, that nothing would ever be the same again. I wish I could say I ignored the questions after that night, that I pushed them down and returned to the certainty I had always known. But that would not be true, because something had already changed inside me, something I could not reverse. And the more I tried to suppress it, the stronger it became, like a voice that refused to be silenced, not loud, not aggressive, just persistent, patient, just waiting for me to stop pretending everything was still the same. I continued my routine. I led prayers. I taught my students. I spoke with confidence about things I had once never doubted. But inside, there was a growing tension, a quiet war between what I had always believed and the questions I could no longer ignore. And for the first time in my life, I found myself doing something I had warned others never to do. I started thinking, critically, not just repeating what I had been taught, but actually examining it, testing it, asking myself why I believed what I believed, and that alone felt dangerous, like stepping onto forbidden ground. At first it was small, subtle, I would revisit verses I had memorized years ago and notice things I had never paid attention to before, or inconsistencies I had previously explained away without hesitation, questions I would have dismissed instantly if someone else had asked them. But now they were my questions, and I could not dismiss them so easily because they came from within. And there is something unsettling about realizing that the doubts you used to fight in others are now living inside you. I told no one, not my colleagues, not my family, not even my closest students, because I knew what it would mean if anyone suspected. I knew how quickly respect could turn into suspicion, how quickly suspicion could turn into rejection. And I was not ready for that. I was not ready to lose everything. So I kept it hidden, burying it beneath my daily responsibilities, hoping it would fade on its own. But it didn't fade. It grew. And it began to push me in a direction I never expected, toward things I had always avoided, things I had been trained to reject without question. And one night, alone in my room, I did something that felt almost like betrayal. I opened my phone and searched for something I had never searched for before. Why do Christians believe Jesus is God? Even typing the words made my heart race, as if someone could see what I was doing, as if I was already being judged for it. And when the results appeared, I hesitated, my thumb hovering over the screen, because this was the line, this was the boundary I had always respected, the boundary that separated truth from error, belief from disbelief, safety from danger. But curiosity is a powerful thing, especially when it is fueled by unanswered questions, and before I could stop myself, I tapped on a video, telling myself I was only watching it to understand, to refute, to strengthen my own faith. That was the justification I gave myself, the excuse that made it feel acceptable. But as I listened, something unexpected happened. It did not sound like what I had been told it would sound like. It was not confusion. It was not deception. It was not the weak arguments I had been trained to dismantle. It was calm, clear, almost unsettling in its simplicity. And when they spoke about Jesus, they did not speak about him as just a prophet. They spoke about him as if he was alive, as if he was present, as if he knew them personally. And that language, it disturbed me, because it reminded me of Zainab's words. He talks about God like he knows him. And I felt that same discomfort again. That same quiet unease that I could not explain. I closed the video quickly, my heart pounding, telling myself this was wrong, that I should not be listening to this, that I was opening a door that should remain closed, and for a moment I thought that would be enough, that I could walk away and forget it. But the questions remained, stronger than before, because now they had something to attach themselves to, something tangible, something I could not dismiss as easily as before. Days passed, and I found myself returning to those searches late at night when no one could see, when the world was quiet and I could explore without fear of being discovered. And each time, I told myself the same thing. I am doing this to understand, to defend, to strengthen my faith. But deep down, I knew that was no longer the full truth. Because something in me was not just analyzing, it was listening, and that realization frightened me more than anything else. Because listening meant openness, and openness meant vulnerability, and vulnerability meant risk. The fear was real, not just emotional, but practical. Because I knew what apostasy meant in my world. I knew the consequences. I had taught them myself. I had warned others about them. I had stood in front of people and declared the seriousness of leaving Islam, and now here I was, walking dangerously close to that very line, not because I wanted to rebel, not because I was looking for an excuse to leave, but because I could not ignore the questions any longer. One night, after hours of restless thinking, I came across something I had always avoided completely. Something I had been specifically warned about during my studies, a Bible app. It was simple, nothing special, just text. But to me it felt like something forbidden, something dangerous, something that could change everything if I allowed it to. And I stared at it for a long time, my finger hovering over the download button, my mind racing with every reason I should not do this, every warning, every consequence, every fear I had been taught to associate with even approaching something like this. But then, another thought came, quieter but stronger than I expected. What if the truth is not something to be afraid of? And that thought stayed with me as I sat there in the silence, holding my phone, caught between fear and curiosity, between everything I had been taught and everything I was beginning to question. And before I could overthink it any further, before I could convince myself to walk away, I pressed the button and downloaded it. The moment it finished, I felt a wave of anxiety wash over me, as if I had done something irreversible, something that could not be undone. And for a few seconds, I considered deleting it immediately, pretending it never happened, returning to the safety of what I knew. But I didn't. I couldn't, because something inside me needed to know, needed to see for itself, needed to confront whatever was on the other side of that fear. My hands felt unsteady as I opened the app, my heart beating faster than it should have been for something so simple, just words on a screen. And yet it felt like so much more, like I was standing at the edge of something unknown, and something that could either confirm everything I believed or completely unravel it. And as the screen loaded and the text appeared, I hesitated just for a moment, taking a breath I didn't realize I was holding, before finally allowing my eyes to settle on the first words I would read, trembling, uncertain, and completely aware that this single moment might change everything. Ramadan had always been the time I felt closest to what I believed was God, or at least the time I was supposed to feel it, the time when the discipline intensified, when the hunger, the thirst, the long nights of prayer were meant to purify the soul, bring clarity, bring nearness. And for years I followed that rhythm without question, waking before dawn, standing in prayer until my legs ached, reciting verses until my voice became hoarse, telling myself that this was what devotion looked like, this was what it meant to be faithful. But this Ramadan, something was different, because I was no longer standing in certainty. I was standing in questions, and every prayer felt heavier. Every word I recited felt like it carried a weight I did not know how to hold anymore. During the day, I continued as expected, fasting, teaching, leading others. No one could see what was happening inside me. No one could hear the thoughts that had begun to interrupt even my most familiar recitations, thoughts that whispered questions in the middle of verses I had known all my life, thoughts that made me pause, even if only for a fraction of a second. And in those pauses, I felt something I had never felt before during Ramadan. Distance, not physical distance, but something deeper. Like I was going through the motions while something inside me stood still, watching, waiting, unsure. At night, after the long Taraweeh prayers, when the mosque emptied and the streets grew quiet, I would return home exhausted, not just from the physical strain, but from the internal tension that never seemed to rest. And instead of sleeping, I found myself reaching for my phone, opening that Bible app I had downloaded in secret, reading slowly, cautiously, as if each word carried both danger and possibility. And when I read the words attributed to Jesus, something inside me reacted in a way I could not explain. It was not just curiosity. It was not just intellectual interest. It was recognition, as if the words were not just being read, but were somehow reading me. And that unsettled me more than anything else. One night, after a particularly long day of fasting and prayer, I felt completely drained, my body weak, my mind restless, my heart caught between two worlds I could no longer separate. And I remember lying down, intending to sleep, but my thoughts would not quiet. They kept circling back to everything I had been reading, everything I had been questioning, everything I had been trying to understand. And somewhere in that restless state between wakefulness and sleep, it happened. At first, it felt like a dream, like any other, but there was something different about it, something more vivid, more real, more present. I found myself standing in a place I could not recognize. It was not my home, not the mosque, not anywhere I had ever been, and yet it did not feel unfamiliar. It felt calm, still, like the air itself carried a kind of peace I had never experienced before, and then I became aware that I was not alone. There was someone standing at a distance, not far, but not close enough for me to see clearly at first. And as I looked, trying to understand what I was seeing, my heart began to race, not out of fear exactly, but out of something deeper, something I did not have a name for. And as the figure moved closer, the details became clearer, and I realized I knew who it was, not because someone told me, not because I had seen an image before, but because something inside me recognized him immediately. It was Jesus. I cannot explain how I knew, I just did. With a certainty that did not feel like assumption. It felt like knowledge, like something undeniable. And as he came closer, I saw his face, not in perfect detail, but enough to know that there was something different about him, something I had never encountered before in my entire life. There was no harshness, no distance, no demand, only a presence that felt both powerful and gentle at the same time. And when he looked at me, it felt like he saw everything, not just my actions, not just my words, but every thought, every doubt, every hidden fear I had never spoken out loud. I wanted to speak. I wanted to ask questions. I wanted to understand what was happening, but I couldn't. I was completely still, completely aware, and yet unable to move or even form words. And then he spoke, not loudly, not forcefully, but clearly, in a way that did not just reach my ears, but seemed to settle deep inside me. Ahmad, he said, calling me by name, and the moment I heard it, something inside me broke. Because it was not just the sound of my name, it was the way he said it, like it mattered, like I mattered, in a way I had never experienced before. You are searching, he said, and I felt it, not as an accusation, not as a correction, but as a simple truth, a recognition of something I had been trying to hide even from myself. And in that moment, I felt exposed and known at the same time, and instead of fear, there was something else, something I had never felt in all my years of prayer, all my years of obedience, all my years of trying to be close to God. There was peace, deep, overwhelming peace, the kind that does not come from effort, the kind that does not depend on performance, the kind that simply exists, and I did not understand it, but I could not deny it either. I do not remember everything that was said after that. Guess not in clear words, but I remember the feeling, the sense that I was being invited into something, not forced, not commanded, but invited, and that alone was enough to shake everything I thought I knew, because my entire life had been built on obligation, on duty, on submission. And here I was, standing in what felt like the presence of someone who was not demanding anything from me, only offering something I did not know how to receive. And then I woke up. My eyes opened suddenly, my body tense, my heart racing, and for a few seconds I did not know where I was. The room felt unfamiliar. The silence felt heavier than usual, and I sat up, trying to steady my breathing, trying to make sense of what had just happened, telling myself it was just a dream, just my mind processing everything I had been thinking about, or everything I had been reading. But the more I tried to explain it away, the less convincing that explanation became, because it did not feel like a dream. It felt real, more real than anything I had experienced in a long time. And as I sat there in the darkness, replaying the moment over and over in my mind, one thought kept returning, louder than all the others, more unsettling than anything I had faced before. Why did Jesus feel more real than everything I've ever known? I tried to forget it. I really did, because everything in me told me that what I had experienced that night was dangerous, not just confusing, but dangerous, the kind of thing that could pull me away from everything I had built my life on, and I could not afford that. I had too much to lose, too many people depending on me, too much history behind me, So I did what I had always done when something felt wrong or uncertain. I pushed harder in the direction I believed was right. I increased my prayers, extended my recitations, spent longer hours in the mosque, surrounded myself with the familiar rhythms of discipline and obedience, telling myself that if I just returned to what I knew, the feeling would fade, the memory would lose its power, and everything would go back to normal. But it didn't go back to normal because something had already shifted inside me, something that could not be undone by routine or repetition. And the more I tried to drown it out with religious activity, the clearer it became. Not louder in sound, but stronger in presence, like a quiet truth that refused to be buried. And what troubled me the most was not just the memory of the dream itself, but the feeling that came with it, that peace, that sense of being known, because no matter how much I prayed, no matter how much I tried to recreate that connection through my usual practices, I could not find it again in the way I had always expected to. I went to other scholars, men I trusted, men I had studied under, men who had guided me for years, but I did not tell them everything. I could not. I was careful with my words, speaking in general terms about doubt, about feeling distant, about wanting to strengthen my faith, and they responded as I expected. They told me to increase my devotion, to guard my thoughts, to avoid anything that could introduce confusion, and part of me wanted to accept that, to believe that the solution was simply more effort, more discipline, more control. But another part of me, the part that had been awakened that night, knew that the problem was not a lack of effort, because I had spent my entire life giving effort, and yet something essential had still been missing. At night, when everything was quiet, and I could no longer hide behind activity, I found myself returning to the one thing I knew I should avoid, that Bible app, opening it slowly, cautiously, as if I was crossing a line each time I did. And instead of reading randomly, I began to focus on the words of Jesus, the Gospels, because something about them drew me in, something about the way he spoke, the way he addressed people, the way he seemed to understand the human heart without needing explanation. And as I read, I felt that same tension again, that same mixture of fear and attraction. Was because what I was reading did not feel empty, it did not feel distant, it felt alive in a way I could not explain. One night I came across a passage that stopped me completely. The words were simple, but they struck something deep inside me. "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." And I stared at those words for a long time, reading them over and over again, because they felt personal, not like a general statement, but like an invitation. And what unsettled me was not just the promise of rest, but the recognition in the first part, "You who are weary and burdened," because that was exactly how I felt, even if I had never admitted it out loud, even if I had spent years pretending otherwise. And for the first time, I allowed myself to ask a question I had been avoiding. What if this is what I have been missing? That thought terrified me because it pointed in a direction I was not ready to follow, a direction that would require me to reconsider everything I believed, everything I taught, everything I represented. And I could feel the weight of that possibility pressing against me, reminding me of the cost, reminding me of what I stood to lose, my position, my respect, my family, my sense of identity, all of it tied to the very beliefs I was now beginning to question. The internal conflict became almost unbearable. It was no longer just intellectual. It was emotional, spiritual, personal, a constant battle between truth and safety, between what I was beginning to see and what I was afraid to accept. And there were moments when I wished I had never opened that door, never asked those questions, when never read those words, because ignorance would have been easier, certainty would have been safer. But once you see something, once you feel something that resonates at a level deeper than logic, you cannot simply pretend it does not exist. I started becoming more withdrawn, more distracted, even in my daily interactions, and I could tell that people were beginning to notice small changes, subtle shifts in my behavior, moments where I seemed distant, less present, less certain than I used to be, and I tried to cover it. to maintain the image everyone expected, but it was becoming harder because the struggle inside me was no longer hidden as easily as before. One evening, as I sat with my family, I realized how much was at stake. I looked at their faces, at the familiarity, the history, the connection we shared, and I felt a deep sense of fear, not just of losing them, but of causing them pain, because I knew that if my internal struggle ever became visible, it would not just affect me, it would affect all of them, and that thought alone was enough to make me hesitate, to make me question whether the truth, whatever it was worth the cost. But even as that fear held me back, something else continued to pull me forward, something I could not fully explain, a quiet but persistent sense that I was being led somewhere, not forced, not pushed, but drawn, and that drawing became stronger with each passing day, with each passage I read, with each moment I allowed myself to consider the possibility that what I had always believed might not be the complete truth. And then, one day, something happened that made me realize I was no longer hiding as well as I thought. Someone close to me looked at me in a way that made it clear they could see the change. They could sense that something was different, something I had not yet spoken, and in that moment, I felt a new kind of fear, not just of what I was discovering, but of being discovered, of having my internal struggle exposed before I was ready to face it myself. And as that realization settled in, one question rose above all the others, pressing against my mind with a weight I could not ignore. How much longer can I hide this? Her name was Amina, and if anyone had told me that a teenage girl would become the turning point in my life, I would have dismissed it without a second thought, because I was the teacher, the guide, the one people came to for answers, not the one who needed them. But by that point, everything I thought I understood about certainty and authority was already beginning to unravel, even if I hadn't fully admitted it yet. Amina was 16, one of my students, quiet but observant, the kind of person who spoke little but noticed everything, and I had always considered her attentive, respectful, someone who absorbed what was taught without resistance. But I began to realize that she was seeing more than I intended to show. It started subtly, small moments during lessons when I would pause just a little too long, when my answers lacked the sharp confidence they once had, when my eyes drifted as if I was somewhere else entirely. And while others didn't question it, she did, not openly, not immediately, but I could see it in the way she watched me, as if she was trying to understand something that didn't match the image she had of me. One afternoon after class, as the others were leaving, she stayed behind, and I remember feeling a slight tension in my chest, even before she spoke, as if some part of me already knew that this conversation would not be like the others. And when she finally approached me, her voice was calm but direct. "Ustad, are you okay?" It was such a simple question, but it caught me off guard in a way I wasn't prepared for, because I had spent so much time hiding my internal struggle that hearing it acknowledged, even indirectly, felt almost like exposure. "Of course," I replied quickly, too quickly, the automatic response of someone who is not ready to be honest. But she didn't move. She didn't accept it the way others would have. Instead, she tilted her head slightly, studying me with a quiet intensity that made it difficult to look away. "You seem different," she said, choosing her words carefully, and I felt that familiar defensive instinct rise in me, the urge to shut the conversation down, to reassert control, to maintain the image I had always upheld. But something held me back, something that made me hesitate, perhaps because I was tired of pretending, perhaps because I sensed that she was not approaching me with judgment, but with concern. "What do you mean?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady, and she paused for a moment before responding, as if considering how much to say. "When you teach now, it's like you're thinking about something else at the same time," she said, and her words struck deeper than I expected, because they were true, more true than I wanted to admit, and for a moment, I didn't know how to respond. I could have dismissed it, redirected the conversation, reminded her of her place as a student, but instead, I found myself asking a question I hadn't planned. "And what do you think that means?" She hesitated, and I could see that she was weighing her words carefully, aware of the risk of speaking too openly. But then she said something that shifted everything. "I think you're searching." And the moment those words left her mouth, I felt the same sensation I had felt in the dream. That feeling of being seen, not on the surface, but at a deeper level. And it unsettled me in a way I could not ignore. "Be careful with your assumptions," I said, my voice firmer now, trying to regain control of the conversation. But she did not retreat. She did not apologize. Instead, she asked me something that felt even more direct than before. "Can I ask you something, Ustad?" I nodded, even though part of me wanted to refuse, and she took a small breath before speaking. "Do you feel close to God?" The question hit me harder than anything else she had said, because it was not theoretical. It was not about knowledge or doctrine. It was personal. And for a moment, I considered giving the expected answer, the correct answer, the one that would end the conversation safely. But the words caught in my throat, because for the first time, I wasn't sure I could say them honestly. "Why would you ask that?" I said instead, deflecting, but she didn't let it go. "Because I've been reading something," she said, and that immediately caught my attention, a subtle shift in my focus. "Reading what?" I asked, and my tone more cautious now, and she looked at me, not with fear, but with a quiet confidence that surprised me. "About Jesus," she said, and the moment she said his name, I felt a strange mixture of tension and recognition. The same tension I had felt when I first heard Zainab speak, the same recognition I had felt when I read the words in the Bible, and I realized in that moment that I was not the only one standing on this edge. "You need to be careful," I said quickly, almost instinctively, but she shook her head slightly. "I am being careful," she replied. "That's why I'm asking questions." And there was something in her tone that made it clear she was not approaching this lightly, not rebelling, not acting impulsively, but genuinely seeking understanding. And I found myself in a position I had never been in before, is not as the one giving answers, but as someone who did not have them. "What have you read?" I asked, and she hesitated for a moment before answering. "That God doesn't just want obedience. He wants a relationship," she said, and those words, they echoed everything I had been wrestling with, everything I had been trying to understand but had not yet put into clear language. And I felt that internal tension rise again, stronger now, because hearing it from someone else made it harder to dismiss. "And what do you think about that?" I asked, my voice quieter now, less authoritative, more uncertain. And she looked at me in a way that felt both gentle and firm at the same time. "I think it's true," she said, "and I think you feel it too." And for a moment, I could not respond, because she had said out loud what I had been afraid to admit even to myself, and the silence between us grew heavier, filled with everything that had not yet been spoken. Then she asked the question that changed everything, the question that cut through all the fear, all the hesitation, all the excuses I had been holding on to. "What are you really afraid of?" she said, her voice steady, her eyes fixed on mine. "The truth or the cost?" And in that moment, I felt something inside me shift. Not completely, not all at once, but enough to know that I could no longer avoid the answer, because deep down, I already knew it. I was not afraid of the truth. Not anymore. I was afraid of what it would take from me, what it would demand, what it would cost, and as that realization settled in, I understood that the path in front of me was becoming clearer, even if I was not yet ready to walk it. Everything began to unravel after that conversation, not all at once, not in a dramatic explosion, but slowly, quietly, like something loosening thread by thread until it could no longer hold together. And at first I tried to convince myself that I still had control, that I could manage both worlds, maintain the image everyone expected while quietly sorting through the storm inside me. But the truth is, once something changes at the core, it eventually shows on the surface, no matter how hard you try to hide it. I became more cautious with my words, more measured in my teachings, avoiding certain topics, skipping over things I once spoke about with confidence, and people noticed, maybe not consciously at first, but in subtle ways. The questions they asked became sharper, the looks they gave me lingered a little longer, and I could feel the shift in how they saw me, not yet suspicion, but something close to it, something that made me uneasy every time I stood in front of them. At home, it was harder to hide, because family sees what others miss. They notice the small changes, the quiet distances, the moments when you are physically present but mentally somewhere else. And my wife began to ask questions, simple at first. Are you okay? You seem tired. But beneath those questions was something deeper, something she could not yet name. And I answered the same way I always had, with reassurance, with deflection, with just enough truth to avoid revealing the whole picture. But even as I spoke, I could tell she was not fully convinced. The tension grew gradually, like a pressure building beneath the surface, and I could feel it in every interaction, every conversation, every moment where I had to choose my words carefully, where I had to decide how much of myself to reveal and how much to conceal, and that constant calculation began to wear me down, because living between two realities is exhausting, especially when one of them is slowly becoming more real than the other. Then the confrontation came, sooner than I expected, and not in the way I had imagined. It started with something small, a conversation I thought I could handle, a discussion with another imam about a topic I would have once navigated easily. But this time, something slipped, not a direct statement, not a clear declaration, just a hesitation, a lack of certainty where there should have been none. And he noticed. I could see it in his eyes, the way his expression changed, the way he leaned in slightly as if trying to understand what he had just heard. Are you unsure? He asked, his tone calm but probing, and I felt a tightening in my chest, the kind that comes when you realize you are standing too close to the edge. No, I replied quickly, but even to my own ears, it did not sound as firm as it should have. And that was enough, because in our world, certainty is expected, doubt is not tolerated, especially from someone in my position. That conversation did not end with accusations, not immediately, but it planted a seed, and once that seed was there, it began to grow, quietly at first, then more visibly, questions from others, subtle at first, then more direct. That you seem different, your teachings have changed, is something going on? And each question felt like a step closer to exposure, a step closer to a moment I was not ready to face. At home, the pressure intensified. My wife's concern turned into worry, then into frustration, because she could sense that I was holding something back, something important, and the distance between us grew, not because I wanted it to, but because I did not know how to bridge it without revealing everything, and I was still trying to avoid that, still hoping I could find a way to resolve my internal conflict without destroying the life we had built together. But the truth has a way of demanding to be acknowledged, and the more I tried to suppress it, the more it pushed back. Not aggressively, but persistently, like a quiet voice that refuses to be ignored. And I found myself returning again and again to the words I had read, the encounter I had experienced, the sense that I was being drawn towards something I did not fully understand but could no longer deny. The turning point came one evening when my wife confronted me directly. No more careful questions, no more gentle concern, just a simple, direct demand for honesty. "What is happening to you?" she asked, her voice steady but filled with emotion, and I could see it in her eyes. Fear, confusion, a need for clarity that I could no longer avoid, and for a moment, I considered continuing the pattern, offering a partial truth, something that would calm her without exposing everything. But something in me resisted, something that had been growing stronger with each passing day, something that was no longer willing to hide. "I don't know if I believe the same way anymore," I said, the words coming out slower than I expected, heavier, as if they carried the full weight of everything I had been holding inside. And the moment they left my mouth, I knew there was no taking them back, no softening them, no pretending they meant something else. And the silence that followed was unlike anything I had experienced before. Not just quiet, but charged, filled with everything that those words implied. Her expression changed instantly, confusion giving way to shock, then to something deeper, something more painful. "What are you saying?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly, and I could feel the gravity of the moment pressing down on both of us, because this was not just a personal struggle anymore. This was something that would affect everything: our marriage, and our family, our place in the community, and I could see that realization forming in her mind, even as she waited for me to explain. "I'm searching," I said, echoing the word that had been spoken to me before, the word that now felt like the only honest description of where I was, and she shook her head as if trying to reject what she was hearing. "Searching for what?" she asked, and for a moment I hesitated, because saying it out loud would make it real in a way I was not sure I was ready for. But the truth was already there, already shaping everything, and I could not avoid it any longer. "For truth," I said quietly, and the moment I said it, I saw something break in her expression. Not completely, not irreparably, but enough to know that we had crossed a line we could not easily return from. The days that followed were filled with tension, conversations that went nowhere, emotions that shifted between fear, anger, and disbelief. And beyond the walls of my home, the situation continued to escalate. The whispers grew louder, the questions more pointed, and I could feel the space around me shrinking, the margin for hiding becoming smaller with each passing day. I began to understand, not just intellectually but experientially, what it meant to stand at the edge of everything I had ever known, to feel the weight of what I might lose pressing against the pull of something I could not deny. And in that tension, I realized something I had been avoiding. I could not stay where I was. I could not continue living between two truths, because eventually one would have to be chosen. And as that realization settled in, clear and unavoidable, I knew that a moment was coming, a moment when I would have to decide, not just internally, but openly, publicly, definitively, a moment when silence would no longer be an option. And as much as I feared that moment, as much as I wanted to delay it, I could feel it approaching, steady, inevitable, and I knew that when it arrived, everything would change. The day I spoke the truth out loud was the day my old life ended, and I knew it even before the words left my mouth. I could feel it in the tension of the room, in the weight of every eye fixed on me, in the silence that seemed to press against my chest, as if the air itself was waiting for what I was about to say. They had called me to meet the elders, the imams, men I had studied under, men who once praised me, trusted me, and believed I would carry the torch of our faith forward. And now they sat across from me, not with warmth, but with suspicion, with concern, with something that felt like judgment waiting to be confirmed. My wife was there too, sitting slightly behind them, her face tight with emotion, and I could not bring myself to look at her for long, because I knew what this moment meant for her, as much as it did for me. Maybe even more. One of the senior imams spoke first, his voice calm but firm, the kind of tone used when someone is being given one last opportunity to correct themselves. "We have been hearing things," he said, "about your teachings, your doubts, your direction," and the pause before that last word was deliberate, as if even naming it directly would give it too much weight. "We want to hear from you," he continued, clearly, "so there is no misunderstanding." I felt my hands tighten slightly in my lap, not visibly, but enough for me to notice, and in that moment, everything inside me seemed to slow down. My thoughts, my breathing, even the fear that had been so loud before became quiet, not gone, but quieter, like something else was taking its place. For a brief second, I considered saying what they wanted to hear, offering reassurance, explaining away the changes, returning to the safety of the life I had always known, because I knew I could do it. I knew exactly what to say, exactly how to sound convincing, but the moment that thought formed, something in me resisted it, strongly, clearly, as if I had already crossed a line internally and could not go back. And in that resistance, I felt something unexpected, not strength in the way I understood it before, but a kind of calm, a quiet certainty that did not come from arguments or preparation, but from something deeper. I lifted my head slightly and met their eyes, one by one, and when I spoke, my voice was steady, even though my heart was not. "What you have heard is true," I said, and the moment those words left my mouth, I felt the shift, immediate and undeniable. The atmosphere in the room changed, the tension sharpened, the silence became heavier, charged with everything those words implied. "Explain," one of them said, more sharply now, and I took a slow breath, knowing there was no way to soften what I was about to say, no way to make it easier for them or for myself. "I have been searching," I said, choosing the words carefully but honestly, "and I cannot deny what I have found," and even as I said it, I could see the reactions forming, confusion, anger, disbelief, all rising beneath the surface, waiting to break through. "What have you found?" another asked, his voice edged with frustration now, and for a moment I hesitated, not because I did not know the answer, but because saying it out loud would make it real in a way that nothing else had. It would mark the point of no return, and I felt the weight of that realization settle over me, heavy, final. And yet, there was also something else, something I could not ignore, that same sense of peace I had felt before, faint but present, steady beneath the fear. "I believe in Jesus," I said finally, the words clear, simple, impossible to misunderstand. And the reaction was immediate, voices rising, expressions hardening, through the calm control that had defined the beginning of the meeting, breaking apart as the reality of what I had said settled in. "Astaghfirullah," one of them muttered, shaking his head, while another leaned forward, his voice sharp. "Do you understand what you are saying?" And I did, more than ever. I understood the weight of it, the consequences, the cost, all of it. But I also understood something else, something that had become impossible to deny. "Yes," I said quietly, "I do." The questions came quickly after that. Accusations, attempts to correct me, to bring me back, to make me see reason as they understood it. They spoke of doctrine, of consequences, of the dangers of leaving the truth, and I listened. I truly listened, because these were the same arguments I had once made myself, the same warnings I had given to others. But now, when standing on the other side of them, they no longer held the same power, not because I dismissed them, but because something deeper had taken root in me, something that could not be undone by fear alone. "You are being deceived," one of them said firmly, and I shook my head slightly, not in defiance, but in quiet certainty. "No," I replied, "for the first time. I feel like I am seeing clearly," and those words only intensified their reactions, because clarity, in their view, was something I had already possessed, something I was now abandoning, not gaining. My wife spoke then, her voice breaking through the tension, filled with emotion. "Ahmad, please," she said, and I turned to look at her fully for the first time, and what I saw in her eyes almost broke me. Fear, pain, confusion, all mixed together, and for a moment, everything inside me wavered, because this was not just about belief. This was about people, about relationships, about the life we had built together, and I felt the weight of that more than anything else. "I didn't choose this lightly," I said to her, my voice softer now, more personal. "I fought it. I tried to ignore it, but I can't deny what I have experienced." And even as I spoke, I knew that my words would not ease her pain, not in this moment, not when everything she believed was being challenged by the person she trusted most. The meeting did not end peacefully. There was no resolution, no agreement, only a clear and painful separation, a line drawn that could not be crossed without consequence. And as I stood to leave, I felt the weight of everything I was walking away from. My position, my reputation, my place in the community, and most painfully, the sense of belonging that had defined my entire life. But as I stepped out of that room, as the voices behind me faded and the reality of what I had just done settled over me, I felt something unexpected rise within me. Not relief exactly, not happiness, but something steady, something grounding, something that held me even as everything else seemed to fall apart. It was that same peace, quiet but undeniable, and for the first time, I understood that this peace was not dependent on my circumstances, not tied to my position or my acceptance by others. It was something deeper, something that remained even when everything else was stripped away. I walked away from that place, knowing that I had lost more than I could fully comprehend in that moment, but also knowing that I had chosen something I could not deny, is something that had become more real to me than anything I was leaving behind. And even though the road ahead was uncertain, even though the cost was already proving to be as heavy as I had feared, I knew one thing with a clarity I had never experienced before. I could not go back. Walking into this new life felt like stepping onto unfamiliar ground, the kind of terrain that is both terrifying and strangely liberating, because every step I took was no longer guided by fear or expectation, but by a quiet, unwavering sense of direction I could not have known before. The days that followed leaving my old life were not easy. I could feel the absence of familiar faces, the silence of doors that once welcomed me now closed, the loss of respect and community pressing down like a weight I had never carried before. And yet, amidst all of that, there was something new rising inside me, a sense of freedom I had never experienced, a feeling that the world, with all its uncertainty, was finally aligned with truth, at least for me. I found a small online Christian community, people scattered across the globe who met in quiet virtual spaces, who shared encouragement, guidance, and prayer. And for the first time, I experienced a sense of belonging that had nothing to do with title, authority, or tradition, but everything to do with shared faith, compassion, and love. I listened to their stories, shared my own cautiously at first, and each time I spoke, I felt a part of the burden lift, the shame, the secrecy, the fear, slowly giving way to honesty, humility, and healing. I began to understand that what I had feared losing, family, status, recognition, was painful, yes. But it was nothing compared to what I had gained: clarity, purpose, and a personal relationship with Jesus. A relationship that did not require perfection, only surrender. And as I read the scriptures, attended virtual gatherings, and prayed in the quiet of my room, I felt a depth of peace that had been absent my entire life. A peace that was not dependent on others, not contingent on acceptance, but rooted in the unchanging presence of God. I remember sitting one night after a long day, looking at my reflection and realizing that I had been transformed in ways I could not have planned, that the person staring back at me was both familiar and completely new. Someone who carried scars, yes, but also hope, courage, and a sense of direction that had been absent for decades. And I whispered to myself, almost in disbelief, "When I am free." The freedom did not erase the pain. It did not undo the losses. It did not make the rejection from my community or the grief in my family vanish. But it changed everything else. It gave meaning to the suffering. It made it part of a journey that was larger than fear, larger than doubt, larger than any single consequence I had faced. And I began to see that each step of loss had brought me closer to what I was meant to find, the truth I had been seeking, the peace I had been longing for. I started connecting with others who had gone through similar experiences, listening to their struggles, their triumphs, their fears, and I realized that my story was not unique in its pain, but in its encounter with grace, in the way God meets those who are willing to seek, even in the most impossible circumstances. I began to pray more openly, not just for guidance, but for understanding, for healing, for my family, and even for those who had turned away from me in anger, because I could feel the love of Christ expanding in my heart, reshaping my desires, softening my anger, replacing resentment with compassion. And I saw that the cost of following Him was real, yes, but the reward was far beyond anything I could have imagined. And as I continued walking, piece by piece, through this new life, I felt a joy I had never known, quiet, steady, and true, a joy that could exist even alongside sadness, alongside loss, because it was rooted in something eternal, not temporary, not dependent on circumstance, not shaken by the storms of life, but secure, unwavering, unending. I thought often of the people I had left behind, my family, my students, my friends. And while I still grieved the distance, I understood that love does not require agreement, that faith does not require approval, and that truth, once seen, demands courage to follow, even when it costs everything. I remembered Amina, her question echoing in my mind. What are you really afraid of? The truth or the cost? And I realized that the truth had won, that it had been worth every fear, every sleepless night, every pang of uncertainty, because in choosing it, I had discovered something far greater than safety or comfort, something I could not have known in my old life, something real, enduring, and life-giving. And so I sit now, sharing this story not to boast, not to prove anything, but because someone out there may be standing where I once stood, afraid, uncertain, questioning, and feeling trapped between the life they have and the truth they sense. And I want them to know that it is possible to step forward, to find the freedom that comes not from avoiding cost, but from embracing it with courage and faith. I want to tell them that God is not distant, that His love is not conditional on perfection, that He sees, He knows, He meets, and He restores. And I can testify that even in the darkest moments, even when everything familiar is stripped away, there is hope, there is peace, there is life beyond fear. And it begins with Him. I lost everything I thought defined me, everything that gave me security and identity in the world. But in losing it, I found the truth. And in finding the truth, I found Jesus. And He has set me free, free from fear, free from pretense, free to live a life that is real, honest, and full. And that freedom, I want the world to know, is possible for anyone who seeks Him with all their heart.